The sound of a certified letter dropping through my mail slot was the beginning of my nightmare with Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. I'd spent 5 years living peacefully in my suburban corner of Rochester, New York, until Patricia Wilson decided my workshop violated community guidelines. I stared at the formal notice, complete with the HOA's embossed letterhead, and felt my blood pressure spike. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, scanning the document that claimed my detached garage workshop violated multiple covenants and restrictions. According to Patricia, the HOA president, my unsightly industrial activities were decreasing property values and disturbing the neighborhood aesthetic. My name is Gabriel Norris, and I'm a furniture maker. Not commercially, just a hobby that kept me sane after long days managing IT systems. My workshop was completely contained in my detached garage, which had been there since I bought the house. I'd simply insulated it and added better lighting to accommodate my woodworking. I tossed the letter onto my kitchen counter and grabbed my phone, scrolling to find the HOA management company's number. After 20 minutes of being transferred between 3 different representatives, I finally reached someone who could explain the complaint. "Mr. Norris, we've received reports of excessive noise, commercial activity, and unpermitted structural modifications," explained the representative, her voice carrying that practiced customer service tone. "That's absurd. I have a hobby workshop that was already disclosed when I purchased the home. There have been no structural changes requiring permits," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Well, Miss Wilson has provided photographic evidence and has requested code enforcement investigate. We're obligated to follow up on all complaints." I hung up and stepped outside, looking across the street to Patricia's immaculate colonial with its perfectly trimmed hedges. The irony wasn't lost on me that her house had mysteriously grown a sunroom on the back sometime last year. I distinctly remembered wondering if she'd gotten the proper approvals for it. The next morning, I was sipping coffee when my doorbell rang. 2 men in official-looking uniforms stood on my porch, clipboards in hand. "Gabriel Norris. We're from the Rochester Code Enforcement Office. We've received a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property." I invited them in and explained the situation, showing them my workshop setup in the garage. They took measurements and photos, checked ventilation, and inspected the electrical work I'd had professionally installed. "Everything seems to be in order here, Mr. Norris," said the taller inspector, Mark Jenkins. "You've got proper ventilation for dust collection, and your electrical upgrades have the right permits. This is a residential workshop that falls within allowed use for this zone." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, this has been incredibly stressful, we understand. Unfortunately, we get called into a lot of HOA disputes," Mark replied, making notes on his clipboard. "While we're in the neighborhood, we'll be doing routine inspections on other properties that have had recent modifications." I couldn't help myself. "You might want to check the sunroom addition at 247 Maple Drive. I don't recall seeing any permit notices posted when it went up last summer." Mark glanced at his colleague and made another note. "We'll look into that. Standard procedure." As they left, I noticed Patricia watching from her living room window. I waved politely, but she quickly disappeared behind her curtains. 2 days later, I was in my workshop sanding a coffee table when a commotion erupted across the street. Patricia's shrill voice carried clearly through the neighborhood as she confronted the same code enforcement officers who had visited me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wandered to my driveway for a better view. Patricia stood on her front lawn, arms waving dramatically as she argued with the inspectors. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the spectacle unfold. "This is harassment." "Gabriel put you up to this," Patricia shouted, pointing in my direction. Mark remained professional. "Miss Wilson, we're simply following up on potential code violations. Your sunroom addition does not appear in our permit database, and according to our measurements, it extends beyond your property's setback requirements." My neighbor Michael Baker sidled up next to me. What's happening? Code enforcement. Apparently, Patricia's sunroom doesn't have proper permits, I explained. Michael chuckled. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. She cited me last month because my trash cans were visible from the street for an extra day. The following week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The community center was packed with homeowners, the tension palpable as Patricia took her position at the front table alongside other board members. She looked considerably less confident than usual, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. HOA Vice President Robert Thompson called the meeting to order. We've called this emergency session to address recent events involving code enforcement in our community. As you may have heard, there have been some irregularities discovered with certain property modifications. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Robert continued. To be transparent, our board president's home has been found to have an unpermitted addition that violates both city building codes and our own HOA setback requirements. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I sat quietly near the back, feeling a mix of vindication and discomfort at the public nature of Patricia's humiliation. Robert continued, "Additionally, we've discovered that several complaints filed against other homeowners originated from President Wilson, seemingly in retaliation for personal disagreements." The room erupted. One elderly resident stood up, pointing her finger at Patricia. "She fined me $200 because my roses were 2 inches taller than the bylaw allows. Meanwhile, she's building illegal structures." More voices joined the chorus of complaints. I was surprised by how many neighbors had experienced similar treatment. When the noise subsided, Robert announced, "The board has voted to suspend Miss Wilson from her duties pending a full review. We'll be holding a special election for a new president next month." Patricia abruptly stood, gathering her papers. "This is a witch hunt. I've devoted years to maintaining property values in this neighborhood while the rest of you want to turn it into a commercial zone." Her eyes found mine in the crowd. "Some of us actually care about preserving the character of Maplewood Estates." She stormed out, leaving a momentary silence before conversations exploded throughout the room. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, sharing their own stories of run-ins with Patricia. It seemed my workshop was just one of many targets in her campaign to control the neighborhood according to her personal vision. Martin Rodriguez, who lived 2 doors down from me, put his hand on my shoulder. "Man, I've been afraid to put up a basketball hoop for my kids because of her. Maybe things will change now." The following day, I received a formal apology from the HOA management company, rescinding all complaints against my workshop, but the story wasn't over. Code enforcement had issued Patricia a substantial fine, and an order to either obtain proper permits for her sunroom or remove the structure within 30 days. Given the setback violations, it seemed unlikely that permits would be approved. I was working from home when I heard the doorbell. Opening the door, I found Patricia standing there, her usual confidence replaced by a strained attempt at friendliness. "Gabriel, I think we got off on the wrong foot," she began, holding a small gift basket. "I just wanted to clear the air between us." I hesitated before inviting her in. We sat awkwardly in my living room as she placed the basket on the coffee table between us. "I may have been overzealous in my interpretation of the HOA guidelines," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Your workshop is really quite tidy." "Thank you," I replied cautiously, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I was wondering if you might have any influence with those code enforcement officers. Perhaps put in a good word about my sunroom situation. I've invested quite a lot in that addition." And there it was. I took a deep breath. "Patricia, I don't have any special relationship with code enforcement. They were just doing their job the same as when they inspected my workshop." Her friendly facade cracked slightly. "But you directed them to my house. You must have some pull." "I mentioned that there was a recent addition on your property. That's public information. They would have discovered it eventually during routine inspections." Patricia's smile disappeared completely. Do you have any idea what it will cost to remove that sunroom? Over $30,000. Not to mention the fine. Perhaps you should have gotten the proper permits before building it, I suggested, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the satisfaction I felt. She stood abruptly. I should have known you wouldn't help. This neighborhood has gone downhill ever since people like you moved in with your hobbies and disregard for property values. As she headed for the door, I called after her, "The gift basket can stay. Consider it a housewarming present for wherever you move next." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. In the weeks that followed, Patricia's sunroom became the talk of Maplewood Estates. Contractors appeared at her house, assessing the structure, followed by heated arguments on her front lawn. Several times, I noticed her showing different real estate agents around her property. The HOA investigation revealed more than just Patricia's vendetta against my workshop. Financial records showed questionable use of association funds, including landscaping services that had only been performed on properties belonging to board members and their friends. The management company promised a full audit and more transparent operations moving forward. At the special election, I was surprised when several neighbors nominated me for the board. I declined, preferring to focus on my woodworking rather than HOA politics, but I did attend meetings regularly to ensure the new leadership remained accountable. Melissa Rodriguez, Martin's wife, won the presidency on a platform of fostering community rather than just enforcing rules. Her first act was to create a community improvement committee that would focus on helping residents comply with guidelines rather than simply issuing violations and fines. Patricia's house sold quickly, despite the now missing sunroom leaving an obvious rectangular patch of newer concrete in her backyard. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she'd moved to a gated community in Florida where, presumably, the HOA was more aligned with her management style. 6 months later, I was putting the finishing touches on a neighborhood project custom benches for the community playground when Melissa stopped by my workshop. "These are beautiful, Gabriel," she said, running her hand along the smooth oak surface. "The kids are going to love them." "Thanks. It's nice to use my hobby to contribute something positive to the neighborhood," she smiled. "That's exactly the attitude we need more of. Actually, I came to give you this." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a certificate of appreciation from the HOA, acknowledging my contribution to the community. It wasn't necessary, but it symbolized how much things had changed since Patricia's departure. "We're also revising the HOA covenant on home workshops," Melissa continued. "The new language clarifies that hobby activities are permitted as long as they don't create excessive noise or commercial traffic. Your setup will be specifically mentioned as an example of appropriate use." "I appreciate that," I said, though I was planning to keep a low profile with my woodworking. Melissa laughed. "Too late for that. Half the neighborhood has requested custom furniture since they saw your work at the community center." The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had tried to shut down my workshop, claiming it would hurt property values, yet now it had become an asset to the community. Sometimes justice works out in unexpected ways. 1 year after the initial complaint, I received an unusual piece of mail, a glossy real estate flyer from a development in Naples, Florida. On the back was a handwritten note. "Thought you'd like to know I'm now head of the Architectural Review Committee here. The standards are much higher. PW." I laughed and tossed it in my recycling bin. Some people never change, but at least our neighborhood had. As summer approached, Maplewood Estates felt like a different place. The community playground, now adorned with my handcrafted benches, was filled with children. Front yards featured more personal touches as residents felt free to express themselves within reasonable bounds. The feared property value decline never materialized in fact. Homes in our neighborhood were selling faster than the surrounding areas. My workshop became something of a community hub. I started offering basic woodworking classes on weekends, teaching neighbors how to make simple projects like birdhouses and picture frames. The HOA even featured my workshop in their newsletter as an example of community enrichment through shared skills. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a class, Michael Baker stopped by with an interesting piece of news. "You'll never believe what I heard about Patricia," he said, leaning against my workbench. "What now?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my tools. "Remember that Florida community she moved to? Apparently, she's already in hot water with their county planning department. Something about unauthorized modifications to protected wetlands behind her property." I shook my head. Some people never learn. The best part. The complaint came from her next-door neighbor, a retired building inspector. We both laughed at the poetic justice. Patricia had escaped one situation only to recreate it somewhere else. Later that week, I found myself sitting with Robert Thompson, the former vice president who had stepped down during the HOA reorganization. We were at the local coffee shop, discussing the transformation of our neighborhood. "You know what the biggest change is?" Robert mused, stirring his coffee. "People actually talk to each other now. Before, everyone was afraid of getting reported for some minor infraction." He was right. Neighbors waved and chatted across driveways. Children played together on front lawns. The rigid formality that had characterized Maplewood Estates had given way to genuine community. "Patricia would hate it," I said with a smile. "She would," Robert agreed. "But she never understood what makes a neighborhood valuable. It's not just about perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. It's about people feeling like they belong." As we were talking, Mark Jenkins, the code enforcement officer, walked into the coffee shop. He recognized us and came over to our table. "Gentlemen, good to see you. How's Maplewood Estates these days?" "Much improved," I replied. "How about you?" "Staying busy," Mark laughed. "Always. Though I have to say, complaints from your neighborhood have dropped significantly. Used to be one of our hot spots." "Not surprising," Robert said. "Patricia Wilson filed most of those complaints." Mark nodded knowingly. "I suspected as much. Speaking of Miss Wilson, you might be interested to know we got a call from our counterparts in Naples, Florida. They were verifying her history here as part of an ongoing investigation." Robert and I exchanged glances. "Anything you can share?" I asked. "Public record at this point." "She's facing significant fines for modifying protected wetlands and falsifying permit applications. Apparently tried to claim the previous homeowner had made the changes." "That sounds familiar," I said, remembering how she'd initially tried to blame her contractor for the unpermitted sunroom. "Some people develop patterns," Mark said diplomatically. "Anyway, thought you might appreciate knowing that justice sometimes follows people across state lines." After Mark left, Robert looked thoughtful. "You know, I feel a little sorry for her." "Really?" I was surprised. "Not for the consequences she's facing, those are well-deserved. But imagine living your life so focused on controlling others that you can't enjoy your own home, your own neighborhood. That's its own kind of punishment." It was a perspective I hadn't considered. While I couldn't summon much sympathy for Patricia given how she'd treated so many neighbors, Robert had a point. Her obsession with control and appearances had isolated her from the very community she claimed to protect. As summer turned to fall, our neighborhood continued to thrive under Melissa's leadership. The annual block party, previously a stiff, formal affair with strict rules about noise levels and approved activities, transformed into a genuine celebration. Children ran through sprinklers, adults chatted over barbecues, and my workshop hosted a birdhouse building station that attracted participants of all ages. Looking around at the vibrant community gathering, it was hard to believe this was the same neighborhood that had felt so oppressive just a year earlier. Melissa joined me as I helped a young boy sand the edges of his birdhouse. "Quite a change from last year, isn't it?" she asked. "Night and day," I agreed. I was actually considering selling my house before all this happened. The HOA restrictions were making it impossible to enjoy my home. "Well, I'm glad you stayed. Your workshop complaint ended up being the catalyst for all this positive change." She gestured at the bustling party. Sometimes it takes someone standing up to a bully to help everyone else find their courage. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd simply been defending my right to pursue a harmless hobby in my own garage. But the confrontation with Patricia had indeed sparked a neighborhood-wide reassessment of how the HOA should function. That evening, as the party wound down and neighbors helped clean up, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the pleasure of woodworking. My home truly felt like home, not just a property subject to the whims of an overzealous HOA president. Winter arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed Maplewood Estates in white. Under the old regime, Patricia would have been issuing citations for snow removal within hours of the last flake falling. Instead, neighbors helped each other clear driveways and sidewalks. I used my workshop to repair several snowblowers for elderly residents, and teenagers earned pocket money shoveling for those who couldn't do it themselves. One cold January evening, I received an unexpected email from a name I didn't recognize: Maria Ramirez. The subject line read, "Warning about Patricia Wilson." Curious, I opened it to find a lengthy message from a homeowner in Patricia's new Florida community. She had apparently found me through the public records of Patricia's code enforcement case and wanted to share information. "Patricia Wilson has become the nightmare of our community," Maria wrote. "After researching her background, I discovered what happened in your neighborhood. Several of us are now fighting her attempts to take over our HOA board. Any information you could share about how your community handled the situation would be tremendously helpful." I spent that evening composing a detailed response, outlining everything that had happened from the initial complaint about my workshop to the discovery of Patricia's unpermitted sunroom and the subsequent HOA reforms. I included contact information for Melissa and Robert, suggesting they might provide additional perspectives. Maria's grateful reply came the next morning. "This is exactly what we needed. Our election is next week, and we'll make sure everyone knows what they're really voting for if they support Patricia." 2 weeks later, a group email arrived from Maria with the subject line, "Victory." Patricia had lost her bid for the HOA board by a significant margin after Maria's group distributed information about her history in Rochester. Spring brought new developments to Maplewood Estates. The HOA, under Melissa's guidance, had revised numerous outdated covenants, creating more reasonable standards that preserved the neighborhood's character without micromanaging homeowners' choices. My workshop continued to serve as a community resource. I'd partnered with the local high school's woodshop teacher to offer weekend classes for students interested in learning practical skills. Several of my adult students had progressed to creating impressive projects of their own. One Saturday morning, as I was setting up for a class, a familiar-looking car pulled into my driveway. I couldn't quite place it until the driver emerged. It was Mark Jenkins from Code Enforcement. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, approaching my open garage door. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. "Not at all," I replied, curious about his visit. "What brings you here?" Mark smiled. "Actually, I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia Wilson is back in town." I nearly dropped the piece of wood I was holding. "What? Why would she come back?" Apparently, things didn't work out too well in Florida. From what I understand, the legal issues escalated beyond fines. There was talk of criminal charges for document falsification and environmental damage. So she fled back to Rochester. That's unexpected. Mark nodded. "She's staying with her sister for now. But here's why I wanted to warn you. She's filed a civil lawsuit against you, the HOA, and the city, claiming harassment and targeting that forced her to sell her home under duress." My stomach dropped. Just when I thought this chapter was closed, Patricia was dragging us back into conflict. "Is there any merit to her case?" I asked. "Not from our perspective. All code enforcement actions were by the book, based on legitimate violations. But civil suits have a way of becoming expensive and time-consuming regardless of merit." I thanked Mark for the warning and immediately called Melissa to share the news. She was as surprised as I was but assured me that the HOA's insurance would cover legal representation for both the association and me as an individual homeowner named in the suit. Within days, I received formal notification of the lawsuit. Patricia's complaint painted a picture of a vindictive neighbor, me, conspiring with corrupt officials to force her from her home. She claimed emotional distress, financial losses from the forced sale of her home, and damages to her reputation. The requested compensation was an astronomical $850,000. The HOA called an emergency meeting to inform all residents about the situation. Our lawyer, Sandra Martinez, explained that while the case had little legal merit, we needed to take it seriously and prepare a thorough defense. The good news, Sandra told the assembled homeowners, is that we have extensive documentation of Miss Wilson's code violations, as well as evidence of her pattern of targeting specific homeowners with spurious complaints. The bad news is that civil litigation is rarely quick or pleasant. Several neighbors volunteered to provide statements about their experiences with Patricia's selective enforcement of HOA rules. Others offered to help cover any costs not included in our insurance coverage. The sense of community that had grown over the past year was never more evident than in that meeting room. What Patricia likely intended to divide us had instead strengthened our bonds. The lawsuit proceeded slowly through the initial stages. I provided a detailed deposition about my workshop, the original complaint, and my interaction with code enforcement. Sandra assured me that I had nothing to worry about legally, but the process still created stress and anxiety. Meanwhile, life in Maplewood Estates continued to improve. The revised HOA guidelines allowed for more individual expression while maintaining reasonable standards. Property values had actually increased, contradicting Patricia's dire predictions about the effects of relaxed rules. 3 months into the legal process, I received an unexpected visitor. Patricia's sister, Eleanor, knocked on my door one evening. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "I know about the lawsuit and I want you to know I don't support what Patricia is doing." I invited her in, curious about her purpose. "Patricia has problems," Eleanor explained once we were seated. "She's always needed to control her environment, but it's gotten worse over the years. After everything fell apart in Florida, she came to stay with me, but now she's trying to dictate how I run my household too." "That must be difficult," I said, genuinely sympathetic. Eleanor nodded. "I've convinced her to see a therapist, but I'm not sure it's helping. The lawsuit is consuming her. She talks about it constantly, about how she's going to use the settlement to buy a new house and show everyone." "Do you think she'll drop the case?" "No," Eleanor said firmly, "but I wanted you to understand what you're dealing with, and—" She hesitated. "I have information that might help your defense." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "These are emails between Patricia and her contractor for the sunroom. They clearly show she knew permits were required but decided to proceed without them to save time and money." I stared at the folder, uncertain about the ethics of accepting it. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because this lawsuit isn't healthy for Patricia or anyone else. The sooner it ends, the sooner she might actually address her real issues." Eleanor stood to leave. "I love my sister, but enabling her behavior isn't helping her." After consulting with Sandra, I provided the emails to our legal team. They were indeed damaging to Patricia's case, showing clear intent to circumvent building codes, the very regulations she had weaponized against others. 2 weeks later, we received notice that Patricia was withdrawing her lawsuit. The official reason cited was health concerns, but we all knew the real story. Without the prospect of a windfall settlement, Patricia had no reason to continue the legal battle. To everyone's surprise, Patricia didn't immediately leave Rochester. Instead, according to Eleanor, she had begun intensive therapy and was looking for an apartment in a different part of the city. While I doubted she'd experienced a complete personality transformation, It seemed the collapse of her lawsuit had forced some kind of reckoning. By the following summer, Maplewood Estates had become a model for HOA reform. Melissa was invited to speak at her Regional Homeowners Association conference about creating balanced community governance. Our revised guidelines were being adapted by other neighborhoods facing similar challenges with overzealous enforcement. My workshop, once the source of so much conflict, now hosted regular community events. I'd expanded into the unused portion of my garage, adding more workbenches for classes and group projects. The HOA had even provided a small grant to purchase tools that could be shared among residents interested in woodworking. One project particularly symbolized our neighborhood's transformation, a handcrafted welcome sign for the entrance to Maplewood Estates. Unlike the formal, imposing monument that Patricia had commissioned years earlier, this sign was warm and inviting, featuring carvings representing the diversity of our community. As I installed the sign with help from several neighbors, Robert Thompson reflected on our journey. "You know, in a weird way, we should thank Patricia. Without her vendetta against your workshop, none of this change might have happened." "True," I agreed, "though I could have done without the lawsuit." "Fair point," Robert laughed, "but look around. This is what a real community looks like, people with different interests and backgrounds coming together, not because they're forced to follow the same rules, but because they genuinely care about their shared space." He was right. What had begun as a dispute over my workshop had evolved into something much more significant, a reimagining of what an HOA could be when it focused on building community rather than just enforcing rules. As the sun set over our newly installed welcome sign, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey we'd taken. Sometimes the most positive changes come from the most unexpected challenges. My workshop, once threatened by an overzealous HOA president, had become a symbol of our neighborhood's transformation. And somewhere across town, I hoped Patricia was finding her own path to a healthier relationship with her surroundings. After all, even the strictest HOA guidelines should have room for growth and change. In the end, the true value of a community isn't found in perfectly manicured lawns or matching mailboxes. It's in the connections between people who choose to share their lives, their skills, and their spaces with one another. That's a lesson worth learning, even if it comes through an unexpected confrontation with an HOA Karen and her illegal sunroom.